My name is Rabbi Sam Feinsmith. I'm filling in as host and teacher today for Rabbi Mark Margolius, and I'm here in lieu of Rebecca Schisler, who's usually here teaching on Fridays, to help us meditate into Shabbat. We'll do the same today, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you. I know that our good friend Jordan is working behind the scenes here and has spotlighted me, but if you want to catch a whiff of the humanity of the other people in this group by looking at their faces, you can always adjust your view to gallery view. Even when I'm pinned myself, I prefer to see all of your sweet faces. So it's just one way for us to really feel part of a community of practice. And I also just want to invite you, if you feel comfortable doing so, to add your gender pronouns to your name and your personal little Zoom box by clicking on the little ellipsis in the top right corner and choosing the option rename. That's a small thing that we can all do to create a more inclusive community. I'm calling in from what is now known as Evanston, Illinois, but is actually land of the Potawatomi. And I want to share with you a brief teaching today. But before we do that, I just want to welcome those who may be here for the first time. I also want to say that you can find prior recordings of previous meditation sessions and yoga sessions in the chat. Jordan has dropped that link in there. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where all of the recordings of previous sits are available, including today's, which will be up there shortly. There's a couple of other resources there today. To my knowledge, we don't have a sponsor today. Jordan, did I get that right? Or did I miss something?
You're good. All good.
Thanks. But if you would like to sponsor one of these daily sits, you can do so for $180. It's really a big help. And no contribution is too small. No contribution is too small. So without further ado, we're going to get started. We're going to be taking a look at a couple of sources to ground our practice today. And today's session is actually titled Taking Refuge in Our Inner Shabbat. Usually we conceive of Shabbat as, like Rabbi Heschel said, a sanctuary in time, right? It's time bound. Begins on Friday at sundown and ends at nightfall on Saturday night. And that's, traditionally how we understand Shabbat. What I want to suggest today and invite you into exploring is that perhaps Shabbat is also a dimension of our own being, and that we can take refuge in that dimension of our own being when things are hard in our lives. And the day of Shabbat, the actual temporal sanctuary in time that many of us might celebrate from, again, Friday at sundown until Saturday night at nightfall, can be an opportune time that allows us to create the kinds of conditions that are very fertile for discovering, recognizing, and then resting in our inner Shabbat refuge. A part of us that is inherently peaceful, calm, still, spacious, and clear. So just a quick disclaimer, don't take my word for any of this. Trust your own experience and check out whatever I'm offering in the laboratory of your own experience. If I could ask Jordan to pull up the source sheet, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of sources here related to the high holidays. And those will bring us home eventually into this whole exploration of what this inner Shabbat refuge might feel like or be like and how we might access it. So In a short while, those of us who are attending high holiday services will probably encounter this prayer in some way, shape, or form. The Unitane Tokef prayer was actually composed in Germany in the Middle Ages. But one of the themes of the high holidays that we find repeated often in the prayers in the Machzor is the theme of impermanence. And I actually have a personal practice of contemplating and paying attention to impermanence every single day of my life. And we find this theme very powerfully stated, very powerfully treated in this prayer, where the Paitan, the person who wrote this liturgical poem, states, Adam yesodome afar v'sofole afar. We are founded from dust, and our end is back to dust. Benafsho yavi lachmo. We expend our very life force, our nefesh, our very life force, all of our vitality in bringing forth our bread, earning our living, right? Mashul kecheres anishbar, kechatzir yavesh, uchetzitz novel, ketzel over, ucheanan kala, ucheruach noshavet, ucheavak poreach, vechachalom yauf. We are likened to a broken shard, withering grass, a fading flower, a passing shadow, a dissipating cloud, a blowing wind, floating dust, and a fleeting dream. Of course, the poet here is inviting us to really contemplate our own impermanence, how our lives are like a fleeting dream. We're here in one moment and gone the next. And not only that, but we actually never know when the conditions will roll around to take us out of this world. And it's true that in our lives, we have some sense of solidity about our own being. And in our culture, especially, we tend to really deny death, right? We've created a culture that celebrates youth and the vigor of youth and the vitality of youth. And unfortunately, a culture where we tend to put folks who are approaching death in homes where we don't have to see them. And as such, as a culture, we kind of have this collective tendency to deny the truth of impermanence. And we also recite this wonderful psalm, Psalm 27, every day during this month of Elul. This is really one of my favorite psalms, and I just love saying it contemplatively, slowly, with mindfulness every day. And one of the lines is, "For my father and mother have left me, but Yud He Vav He shall gather me in." Yud He Vav He shall gather me in. And King David here, the author of the psalm, acknowledges the people we love. Not only we will pass from this world, but the people we love, the people who begat us, the people who gave us life, really everyone we know at some point, right? They will pass from this world. My father passed away in 2020. It was a very difficult period of mourning. But no one escapes this fate. If that were the whole story, life would be pretty difficult to bear. Life would be pretty difficult to bear. But King David invites us to consider that there may be some divine force, some divine reality that we call Yud He Vav He in our tradition that can gather us in, that can provide us with a sense of refuge, even as everything is changing all around us. And contrary to thinking that refuge that we're seeking in the midst of impermanence, the island that we need, the sanctuary that we need to help us make our way through the impermanent reality of our lives and of everything all around us, contrary to thinking that it's somewhere out there and we'll somehow be able to acquire it. Right? The psalmist invites us to consider that this refuge is actually none other than Yud He Vav He. And Yud He Vav He in our tradition means something like the presence or timeless presence or timeless beingness, because it's a contraction of the verb haya, was, hove is, and yihiyeh will be, all smushed into one. Okay? So to be is to be present, is it not? And if we talk about some sort of a higher power that is present in all tenses, we might say that this divine power isn't in any way limited by the usual constructions of time that we as human beings kind of project upon reality. So from now on, when we see the word Yod He Vav He, I'm just going to translate it as timeless presence, timeless presence. And we might imagine that this timeless presence is somewhere outside of ourselves, and that we need to bridge a chasm, right, to somehow find that presence so that it can gather us in and provide us with some stability in our lives. Isaiah, from the Haftarah, the portion from the prophets that accompanies this week's Torah portion, Ki Tavo, he actually says, no, it's not like that, right? In trying to comfort the people, we're in this cycle now of 7 weeks of comfort after the 9th of Av and the commemoration of the destruction of the temple. He says to the people, arise, shine, Kumi Ori, for your light has dawned, Kiva Orech. The presence of Yod He Vav He has shone upon you. The light we're looking for, the presence that we're looking for to help us find some stability in the midst of the torrent, in the midst of the storm, it's actually already shining in us. That presence that we seek, it's already inside of us. It's already inside of us. And Isaiah goes on, no longer shall you need the sun for light by day, nor the shining of the moon for radiance by night. For Yod He Vav He shall be your light everlasting. Your God shall be your glory. So there's a sense here that this presence, it's not subject to the exigencies and the conditions, right? And the turning of the world as day gives way to night and night gives way to day. It's somehow, it's permanent, it's unchanging, it's timeless. I'd like to scroll down a little bit, if you would please do so, Jordan, to the next page, to our final source here, and then we'll turn to meditation. This is from a Hasidic teacher, one of the most important Hasidic teachers in the second generation, Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezerich, also known as the Maggid of Mezerich. And he's commenting here on Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3, which state the heaven and the earth were finished in all their array, right? This is the conclusion of the 7 days of creation. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had been doing. And God ceased on the seventh day from all the work God had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that God had done. And the Hebrew for that God had done, right? The work of creation that God had done is Asher bara Elohim la'asot. La'asot. That verb la'asot means to make. And so the rabbis deduced that God created or made something on Shabbat. So the holy rabbi, the sacred spark, our teacher and master, Rabbi Dov Ber, may he be remembered for eternal life, offered an interpretation of the Midrash. The Midrash says Shabbat arrived and rest came into the world. What is it that God created on Shabbat? Rest. God created rest on Shabbat. The whole world was lacking rest before Shabbat came into being. And he goes on to explain, the Midrash means to say that the power of the mover came into what is being moved, which is to say everything is moving. Once the creative process begins and the world and the universe begin to expand, everything is moving. There's only motion. But what he's saying is that there's a mover, and that mover injected itself into all of the movement. That mover injected itself into all of the movement, and as such is never separate from all of the movement. And he goes on to say the blessed one, which is to say God, is called rest, menucha, menucha. For something that is moving has no rest, yet movement does not pertain to Ein Sof, the Kabbalistic name for God, right? The limitless one. That which is without limits, by definition, can't be moving, right? Because movement happens over the course of duration, and movement has a beginning, a middle, and an end. any discrete thing that moves, right? Starts to move, moves for a while, and then stops. And so movement connotes limitation. And Ein Sof, by definition, being limitless, infinite, can't be subject to movement. This is why God is called rest. Okay, we can pull down the screen share. What the Maggid of Mezrich is inviting us to consider is that behind all of the movement, behind all of the change, behind all of the impermanence, behind all of the swirl of turning causes and conditions in our lives, there's actually a point within all of creation, and we, of course, are part of creation, that is absolutely still, absolutely peaceful, unmoved, unchanged, untouched, and as such, inherently restful, inherently peaceful. So I want to invite us to turn to meditation right now and see if we might be able to point ourselves in the direction of that still, quiet place inside. Not in spite of the movement, but behind and with the movement. The movement doesn't have to disappear. We don't have to get rid of our thoughts. We don't have to get rid of these impermanent bodies. Instead, we can see if we can intuit and recognize the still place inside that's there even as the movement is transpiring. I want to invite you to take a moment to take some deep breaths, oxygenating the blood and letting the breath out on the out breath, relaxing the whole body. And then when you're ready, come to a relative posture of stillness. Holding the body both in a relaxed and grounded way, sinking into your seat, and also at the same time allowing for uplift in the spine, but without hyperextending. Relaxed, dignified posture. The eyes can be open or closed, whichever feels more supportive of focus, whichever feels safer for you, more regulating. And then I want to invite you to find the rising and falling of your breath. And simply follow it moment by moment by paying attention to it with kind curiosity and an attitude of allowing and befriending. If the breath doesn't feel like a safe home base for you, if it feels activating or triggering in some way, you can focus instead on sounds as they arise, move, and pass away. And simply note that moment to moment, these phenomena of breath and sound are characterized by change. There's no solidity, only movement. What rises must fall, and what falls will arise again. And that which is built up collapses, and then something new can come into being. And even as you continue to attend this way to the breath or sounds, I want to call your attention to the possibility that you might notice as well that even as breath and sounds change, move, arise, pass away, that there is also this knowing, this consciousness, this awareness in the backdrop. Is that not true? Another way to say the same thing, there are the contents of awareness, moving through awareness, and then there's the awareness itself. So even as you continue to pay attention to the current of movement, you might also notice if when a breath dissolves, for example, does awareness dissolve? When a sound arises, does awareness rise anew, or was it already there to meet the sound? In other words, pay close attention to the beginnings and endings of these changing phenomena, and simply become curious and aware of what remains when what is here now disappears, and what is already there when what is to arise comes into being. So if everything is moving, but this awareness at the core of your being, would it not be accurate to say that this awareness is inherently peaceful, lacking agitation? If that's so, then perhaps you've discovered your inner Shabbat refuge. And I end with a brief quotation from Sharon Salzberg, who says, "We can place our faith in this awareness because no matter what passing thought or feeling arises, the nature of awareness remains unchanged, pure, open, unimpeded. There is a story that points to this unchanging nature. If someone standing in a room throws paint around, it is sure to damage the walls, floor, and ceiling. Awareness is like a room with no limiting dimensions. No matter how much paint is thrown around, there is no disfiguring impact, no place for it to land. The open nature of awareness can bear anything without becoming damaged. Relying on this unsullied nature, we can see whatever happens to us as part of the rising and falling of all phenomena. This understanding doesn't make us passive, but gives us the ability to see things with a different perspective, knowing that there is always an intact place within us. Then we needn't be paralyzed by our suffering. I'll turn it over to John now for Shofar blowing.
Thank you, Sam. First, I did get a note in the chat from Rivka, who said she sponsored today's sit, for which we in IJS are very grateful. And maybe she can text Sam or Jordan about the details. So with the sound of the shofar, I want to connect it with Sam's teaching in two ways. One is there's few sounds that are more shattering than the sound of the shofar. But in the sounds of the shofar, the one to me that represents impermanence more than anything else is the Tekiah Gedolah, which sounds paradoxical. But I invite you to listen if you're comfortable with your eyes closed. But when I sound the Tekiah Gedolah, I want it not to end. I am trying as hard as I can for it to never end. And it will end at a time not under my control. It's impermanent, even though my intention is that it will live on forever. And I just invite you to listen to that struggle, knowing I've not done a Tekiah Gedolah for a year. So whatever happens, happens. And stay with me with the impermanence and notice the beginning and the ending.
Thanks so much, John. I'd like to invite those who may be reciting kaddish for dearly departed friends, relatives, to rise in body or in spirit to recite kaddish with me. You can put the name of those you're mourning in the chat that feels supportive for you. Yitkadal, Yitkadash.
Amen.
Thank you so much, friends. Rivka, if you're here and you want to either unmute yourself or write into the chat some information about who you're sponsoring in honor of today, that would be wonderful. And I apologize that we missed that you sponsored today's sit. For those who want to, you're welcome to stick around for another 15 minutes or so for some questions and responses. And if you're leaving us today, I pray that you make your way towards Shabbat and make your preparations for Shabbat. You'll also have some sense that you have access now to an inner Shabbat refuge. And I pray that during Shabbat, you'll be able to find your way back to that place. Take good care, friends. And Rivka, go ahead. I see that you're here with us now.
It's in honor of, in memory of my sister-in-law, Tracy Spiewak, who passed away a week ago from leukemia, but also in honor of Sam Feinsmith for his wonderful teachings always.
Thank you, Rivka.
When you said you needed someone to sponsor, I stepped up.
Oh, wonderful. How wonderful. Thank you so much, friend. I'm very lucky. Rivka lives right down the block from me, about a couple miles down the road. Okay, so if you're sticking around with us now and you'd like to ask a question, I ask you to please write it into the chat and preface it with the word question in caps so that I can find it amid all the other offerings that are being shared here in the chat. I did see already a question from Lori about elaborating on my daily practice of recognizing impermanence. Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say that if we're practicing mindfulness at all, right, in any way, shape, or form, we're attending to what's happening in the present moment. And when we're attending to what's happening in the present moment, we see right away that, it's changing. It's all change. All phenomena are always changing. The Buddha said, Sape Sankara Anicca, which means all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. When the causes and conditions come together, a particular phenomenon will arise. When those causes and conditions dissipate, that phenomenon will disappear. Okay? And this is something we can check out in the laboratory of our own experience. And so let's say you're watching the breath, you can notice, so the breath is impermanent. What are the causes and conditions that make it possible for the breath to arise? What are the causes and conditions that cause the breath to dissolve? Right? And we can then repeat that really with every part of our experience. Right? We can do that with objects of the world. Right? We can notice, for example, as I'm looking out the window here, oh, look at that. There's a cucumber plant that had this wonderful harvest. We had these wonderful cucumbers all summer. And now it's starting to shrivel up a little bit. Not completely, but it's beginning to wane. What are the causes and conditions that cause the cucumber plant to arise and give fruit? What are the causes and conditions that cause the cucumber plant to pass away and wither? Right? Of course, there are many causes and conditions, right? Sunlight, the number of hours of sunlight during the day, water, right? The availability of seeds, insects to aerate the soil, and so on and so forth, right? And then when the weather changes, of course, it's no longer hospitable for growth. So that's a very simple thing we can do in our practice. And we can repeat that process with all aspects of the body, literally going limb by limb in a body scan and noticing what are the causes and conditions that cause the sense of having a hand or a finger to arise, right? When those causes and conditions disappear, is the finger or the hand still there? As a solid fixed entity, right? And we can do the same with all of our emotions and all of our thoughts, as well as all other mental phenomena like volitions, beliefs, images, biases, and so on and so forth. Okay. And that's one way that we do that, just by practicing mindfulness, observing the nature of phenomena, and getting curious about whether or not they're conditioned. I like to personally rely on a practice called the 4 preliminaries that comes out of Tibetan Buddhism, which I try to do every day as part of the opening to my longer kind of formal meditation practice. And it's basically bringing 4 thoughts to mind, calling them to mind, remembering them, kind of soaking your consciousness in these 4 thoughts. And they're called mind turning thoughts because they help us to stop looking for our happiness and well-being in conditioned phenomena that are bound to let us down because they're ultimately impermanent, right? and instead to turn our attention inward and look for an unending source of happiness inside of ourselves, like we did today, right? And those thoughts are, number one, the reality of a precious human birth, which is to say that, it's not a foregone conclusion that any of us would be born as human beings. And actually, one of the fortunate things about being a human being is A, we're conscious, B, we have volition, and C, we have bodies. And by dint of the fact that we have bodies, we suffer, right? And it's our suffering actually that causes us to turn towards spiritual practice, because we begin to see, I thought that promotion was going to make me lastingly happy, but here I am a year into the job, and I feel this sense of dis-ease in my body. It just doesn't feel right. It didn't carry the promise that I projected onto it in my mind. We say, well, there's got to be something else. And then, we get a headache or we get sick like I am today. I have some virus or something, and we just see, the nature of the body is to change. If it's healthy, it will grow ill, and that, as we said before, through the lens of the Unatana Tokef prayer, right, it will eventually get sick, grow old, and die, so that recognition can really spur us forward in our spiritual practice in a powerful way. So it's really fortunate and auspicious that we all took a human birth, even though sometimes it can feel so rotten to be a human being. The second mind-turning thought is the reality of impermanence. And this is what I mean when I say that I reflect on impermanence every day. I just remind myself that my body is impermanent, my mind is impermanent, everybody I love is changing as I'm thinking about them. My wife will pass away at some point. I will die. We reflect on our natural world that's changing so drastically right now. We see that's changing too, right? We just bring to mind the things that we tend to think are so solid and reliable. And we actually remind ourselves, really, right, that they are essentially and inherently impermanent because they're conditioned. And for me, what happens when I do that is that it releases my fixation, at least for a time, right, on finding happiness somewhere out there in some sort of object or impermanent experience or relationship or circumstance, right? Because all of those things are inherently impermanent. And then it's much easier to turn inward and say, okay, fine, I'm not going to look out there anymore. Let me look in here. Can I find something that's not conditioned, that is permanent, that is steady and solid and stable, and that I can therefore really rely upon, no matter how things unfold in my life, no matter how difficult things are? Just say real quickly, because I want to take another question. The third and fourth mind-turning thoughts are the truth of karma, which is to say that every single thought, word, and action that I do will have some sort of an effect, right? And there's no escaping that. And therefore, I would be wise to act in a noble way, in a virtuous way, in a kind way, in a compassionate way, right? Because the effect, not in a magical way, right? It's going to come back to me. I don't mean like if I hurt you, somehow the universe is going to bring about the condition, right, that you'll hurt me back. What I mean instead, although that probably would happen, right? But what I mean instead is that when I act unskillfully, unwisely, when I'm lacking in compassion, when I act impulsively, when I act harmfully, right? Right there and then, the effect of that is that there's suffering in my own body, heart, and mind. It creates contraction. It creates pain, creates regret, creates shame. I'm really paying attention. That's the karma. And you can see it right away, right? And finally, the fourth thought is reflecting on the unsatisfactory nature of all conditioned phenomena. Again, as an aid to help us let go of our habitual grasping, right, for things of this world as the source of our happiness and lasting well-being. Right. So you can take something like chocolate cake, or a really pleasant show that you like to watch, and you reflect on how actually, if you look closely at that phenomenon, right, it's not as satisfying as you think it is. Right. When we want something, we tend to really focus only on the attractive qualities. But if we look at the unattractive qualities, for example, with a television show, right, the amount of time we waste in our lives watching crummy TV, right, that we could be doing other things that may be more valuable. And I'm not saying you should never watch TV or that you can't ever kick back and relax in front of the television, or alternatively, right, that actually watching certain shows, right, has an addictive quality to it. And that's actually unpleasant, right? Because you want more, you're not satisfied, right? You're lacking in contentment. When the show ends, there's kind of a reflexive, immediate sense of like, oh, I want more, so I'm going to watch more tomorrow night, or I'm going to watch more now and I won't get enough sleep. And you really call to mind the whole picture, not just the selective kind of perception of positive qualities, right, or the enjoyable qualities, but you focus really on all of the qualities. And you begin to see when you do that, right, that every single phenomenon that is conditioned is inherently unsatisfactory. It will change. And even while you're experiencing it, even if it's pleasant, there's a certain kind of anxiety about losing it. I was actually listening to a spot on NPR, and there's a social scientist who studied how long it takes people. Actually, this is Brene Brown. Some of you know Brene Brown's work, right? She wrote a book on joy. And she said that after you get a hit from something pleasurable, it takes 10 seconds. This is what the research shows. It takes 10 seconds until you begin to feel anxious that you're going to lose it. Anyway, that's a little bit about my own reflection on a daily basis about impermanence. Great. Let's see if there's other questions here. Any suggestions? This is from Karen on how to find the silence in loud places and leaf blowers. When the leaf blower is on, or in a place where there is uneven noise or man-made noise. Yeah. At first I should speak from my own experience. I needed certain kind of pristine conditions to be able to settle my mind enough and become kind of equanimous enough and cut enough through the grasping for worldly things to be able to then identify and see my essential nature as pure awareness. But once you recognize that place inside and can stabilize your capacity to stay in that place, right, to really shift your whole identity into that perspective, right, of that unchanging, limitless, loving, timeless awareness at the core of your being, it doesn't really matter what the external conditions are. Because no matter what noise may be arising in awareness, the awareness itself isn't impacted in any way. It remains inherently peaceful. So what I would say is that a good test of whether you really found this inner refuge, right, is can you actually find the place of stillness inside, even when there's a lot of noise and tumult all around, right? Like for me, because I have a 7-year-old kid, when she's just absolutely losing it or screaming out of glee or joy or excitement, and I feel myself getting overwhelmed in my nervous system naturally, right? Because that's basically how my nervous system is set up. Can I still simultaneously, right, find that place of stillness inside that's always there in the backdrop? And I would say that that would probably be the mark of someone who's really kind of stabilized their capacity to kind of rest in that place. So we'll have to stop here, but I just want to thank you for being here today and giving so generously of your time and of your attention. And especially in support of this wonderful community practice. And I pray that as we move toward Shabbat, that you've at least tasted a little bit of your inner Shabbat refuge. And once you taste it, perhaps there may be a desire to come back and continue working at recognizing this intact, whole, peaceful place inside. Shabbat shalom, friends. All the best.